Thank you very much. We've got a great, very funny panel. I'm Peter Ricchiuti. I taught here at the business school so far for 37 years because I can't retire. Yeah. I can't retire because I don't know how to figure out Medicare B. That's so it's held me back, and I host a radio show on NPR here once a week, out to lunch, but I've really got these great folks. I want to kind of very quickly kind of introduce them. Mike Strecker, there's a way. No, beyond that, there's
wow. I should quit now.
No. Mike has been the PR guy for a long time here, and he's dealt with all these things that you would not want to get in front of the camera about. Everything from COVID to Katrina to those infrequently when the monkeys escape from the primate center.
Right. We got dumber monkeys now. They're escaping much less. Yeah.
That's right. And it's always such cute footage. They're shopping in Covington. It's let's see. Roy, I loved being with you last year, and you two guys were with you. So Jill's the new one. Roy, you are. I don't know what the word is. You're very famous, first of all, and you've written 24 books.
Well, that's true.
That part's true, and you've got. And the thing is, you're so broad. I mean, I see you in magazine articles. I see you speaking in public. You were actually, I guess when I first heard about you, you were a sports writer.
Yeah. Am I on? Can you hear me? Is this working? Okay. I'll stop worrying about that. Yeah, I worked at sports.
No, you can't do that.
Run through my whole. Yeah, I was a sports writer for several years.
Do you know we won the Cotton Bowl?
I heard that.
Yeah, and now the lady with the crown. There's
Her Majesty.
She's been called sassy. What do you think? Irreverent?
I hate that word, but okay.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sassy.
You wrote your own bio. I'm going to tell you what you're getting into here. I was talking to Jill earlier, and commented about the crown and how in New Orleans we see a lot of crowns, Mardi Gras queens and debutantes. And she said, you know what debutantes don't like about group sex? And I'm thinking, where's this going? She goes, all those thank you notes. So they let that be a guide to you. And you know Roy, right?
I do know Roy, and I am here today only because of Roy. Hey, Jim Sons. And I have a special presentation to make to Roy today because
I know what that is.
30 years ago, I was divorced, raising my daughter by myself, no child support, left heavily in debt for what amounted to an awful lot of things like cashmere socks and racing tires, none of which I had possession of. And I was a personal trainer at the YMCA, and I wrote as a stringer for 3 different newspapers. Stringer means, hardly any money. One of those papers was an underground paper started by 2 good friends of mine, Malcolm White and Paul Canzonieri. It was called the Diddy Wah Diddy, and I wrote under the pseudonym of Betty Fulton, which is a whole nother story. And it was a pretty well-guarded secret who Betty Fulton was in town, and so I was surprised and a little suspicious and alarmed when one day I answered the phone at home, still had a landline, and this deep male Southern voice said, "Is this Betty Fulton?" And I said, "Maybe." "Who is this?" And he said, "Well, this is Roy Blount." And I will tell you, in humor world, that's roughly the equivalent of God calling. And I said, "Well, hey," as if he called all the time. And he said that he was compiling and publishing an anthology of Southern humor and would like very much to include something that Betty Fulton had written. And I said, "You can use every word I have ever written," which he did not think would be necessary, but he did include me very graciously in that anthology and placed me in between, I believe, Flannery O'Connor and Eudora Welty, which was a very fine place for a nobody from Jackson, Mississippi to find herself. And so that was 30 years ago. And as a result of when he came to town to Lemuria Bookstore, which is one of the very premier independent booksellers in the entire world. And Roy came to sign the books and very graciously had me there to sign. And all my friends sent flowers. No one sent anything to Roy. No. And we signed books. And then as a result of being in that book, when the What Do You Know show came to town to tape an episode for NPR for their fundraising, I was invited to be on that show. And because of that, I met Willie Morris, of course, one of our most revered Southern writers, but more importantly, his wife, Joanne Pritchard Morris, who was at that time the chief editor at the University Press of Mississippi. And also at that time, one of the 3 papers had changed hands, the Mississippi Business Journal, and inexplicably and with no notice or explanation, they dropped my story, and I was completely freaking out because it was my light bill. And so at that time, as I told Peter, I have no ambition whatsoever, but I was vitally concerned with keeping the lights on and the tuition paid. And so I went to see Joanne and with the idea of publishing a collection of stuff that I'd already written, because I thought that would be very easy, and I am satanically lazy. So the only thing I knew about the world of publishing was that they never want one book. They always want to know what else you got. I had nothing. But I was able and willing to lie. And so I said, I had in mind a book called The Sweet Potato Queen's Book of Love that would include things of explanations like why our motto is never wear panties to a party and things like that. And she was very interested in that, but she said it was a little spicy for the press. But she did want to consider doing the collection. But so for 9 months, I had no idea. She said, go home and then bring me back the best ones. I didn't know if any of them were any good. I did not understand the assignment, did nothing, but was somewhat comforted by the fact that somebody thought there might be something worth publishing. So 9 months later, Joanne called and said that she had left the press and was acquiring for Crown division of Random House, and that she had told them about the fictitious Sweet Potato Queen's Book of Love, and they loved the idea, wanted to see a proposal. I had no idea how to do a proposal. Joanne helped me do that. We did it. She bound it professionally. It looked like a real book.
Now, Jill, I got
to
interrupt you for a second. You teased Roy. You said you have a gift for him.
I'm coming.
It's not really fair to do that.
I'm coming.
Okay.
So they gave me a 2-book contract based on that proposal, and so everything I got, Roy gave me, because then that led directly to my career as an author. And so what I have 2 things for you today. One is, when you, I wrote you a thank you note after our conversation and made a post facto Sweet Potato Queen's promise to you in gratitude for being included in that book. If you don't know what the promise is, you will in a minute. But and you wrote me back immediately and thanked me for my thank you note and said that although you had included many other women writers in your book, none of them had made anything close to the promise, and so they would still be included, but their words would be pointedly misspelled. And so what I have for Roy today is an actual certificate. This is to certify Roy Blount Jr. has received the promise from the Sweet Potato Queen to obtain certain favors of a personal oral nature in exchange for goods and services suitable for framing. And I have also made you a pie.
Oh,
wow.
I don't know which sounds more delicious.
A caramel pie made with my own fair hand, because one of my favorite stories that you tell is a problem sometimes in certain places being able to obtain pie at a particular time. And I hope that you will tell us that story. That is wrapped way. Yeah. So tell us the pie.
We had to get it through
story.
TSA. So,
I remember that Lemuria signing thing. That's one reason I can never run for president, because you came in with a Confederate flag, a huge Confederate flag, which I wrapped myself in ironically. But I realize now that there's a picture of me wrapped in a Confederate flag somewhere, and it's gonna come back. Thank you.
Other than that, you'd be president of the United States.
yeah, just
Wow.
Well,
so
I would
close.
have a little more of a shot.
Right.
You want me to tell about pie?
I love pie.
I can't, I'm trying to remember that story.
This time of day?
This time, yeah.
3.14, does that help at all?
I went into the library at, somewhere in Mississippi, I've forgotten what town now, in the library in Mississippi.
Just me now.
And
We're all going to take our wigs off eventually.
Yeah,
and it's
that's,
just early in the show.
It's travel.
I spent a lot of time in the French Court. I kind of know how this ends, but go ahead.
And there was, and I wanted to get some information, and I was standing in line behind at the information desk in the library behind an elderly man and a young black woman. And the elderly man was just stepping forward to the desk, and he said, you know, I just felt like eating a piece of pie. And of course I know where Miss Browne's restaurant, of course she serves real nice pie. And the lady behind the counter says, oh yeah, everybody knows that, she's wonderful pie. But I didn't know that she's closed this time of day, in the middle of the afternoon, and I didn't know where I could go to get a piece of pie. And the lady behind the desk said, this time of day. I know what you mean, this time of day. And he said, because, so I thought I would come in here to the library, and y'all might know where a man could get a piece of pie. And they said in unison, this time of day. Yeah, just thinking, I don't know. And the lady behind the desk hollered back into the stacks and said, Lorene! And there was a muffled voice said, yeah. Do you know where Mr. Hendricks can get a piece of pie? And
This time of day?
That's what she said. You mean this time of day? And at that point, the young black woman stepped forward and said, excuse me, but I want to read something about the Army, because I got to get out of this damn town. That's my story.
Now, Mike, you have a different situation.
Yeah?
In that, yes, they
No blowjob and no pie.
you've got this.
I've
real
had pie, thank you.
That's right. Yeah. You've got a real job here at the university,
Yeah.
and you do stand-up comedy, which has got to be the toughest job in the whole world.
It's harder than making pie. I tell
Yeah.
you.
Oh no. Yeah. It's you never compare the two, but that's
No.
a very good point. And you're a writer. Now, how did that come about? I mean, I've known you forever, and you're
Yeah.
incredibly clever. But what made you to put paper to pen,
Well,
pen to paper? That's
yeah.
Is that?
My mom taught me how to write, but no, but these guys know more about it than the publishing world than I do. But yeah, I've written, I was a stand-up comedian, and then I got married and had kids, and I figured, well, my stand-up comedy career and life is kind of over. But it turns out that they're a great source of comedy, so unending source, and worth every penny. And so so I started writing some joke books for kids. But at the same time, I had an idea for a novel, a comic novel set here in New Orleans, and these guys, Jill and Roy can attest to how hard it is to get something published, especially a novel. I mean, I wrote this thing so long ago, I was afraid by the time it got published, it was going to be like a period piece, So but just recently I got a call from, and actually the way things happen, 2 publishers that wanted to publish it, and I chose whoever called first. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, it's just an extension. I mean, I think of myself as a writer first and then a performer after, And then I don't know what after that I think of, but
Yeah. Something at the home.
Something,
But it's,
yeah.
yeah.
A dad, oh yeah. Forgot about that.
You mentioned marriage being a great source of material. Marriage is it's a great institution, but who wants to be institutional?
That's right.
So that is really what comes to it. Roy, the word I was looking for earlier was icon, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
So I wanted to.
Well, okay.
I got to ask you
I
something.
don't know how to act.
No. Well,
I don't know how to
it for the
do if I'm an
like you.
icon. I'm just a humble person. And it's so hard for me to put on the airs that people like you expect from me. I've never been called an icon before that I remember.
Yes.
I've been done some things late at night that I don't.
Not iconic.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
The other word here I was kingpin. So it's plenty of good.
Kingpin?
Yeah, I just
There you go.
thought- These are things
Kingfish.
people have said about you over the years.
Kingfish.
Yeah. He ran
Randy
this job.
Newman. Nobody ever talks about Randy Newman's Southern humor, but that album,
Good Old Boys. Yeah, that is just.
We are rednecks.
Yeah,
We are
he
rednecks.
couldn't
We
become
don't
president
know-
either. I don't think.
No. I remember speaking of Randy Newman, he was being interviewed on NPR, and and the guy interviewing him was very reverent, like, Mr. Newman, and he says, what motivates you to write a song? And he goes, well, we have a pool in the backyard in L.A., and I'll be sitting there, and my wife will come out the back door, and she'll push the screen door out, and she'll go, Randy, we're out of money, write something. So it's very kind. Now, for those, there are some people that are, the Sweet Potato Queens it's a cult, and
I am the leader and the object of a worldwide cult.
yes, and the cult.
It's a good job.
We're going to call it here. In addition to all the books and all the people have written that have read those books, tell us about the 6,000 chapters of the Sweet Potato Queens.
There are about 6,500 actually
Wow, as we
in
speak, we've got 500.
37 countries. There's a chapter in Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
Their motto is "No veils for us."
Yeah.
Terrified for them. I hope they live in a bunker. I don't know, but
There's a group that needs
Yes,
empowerment.
yeah.
A bunch of women, yeah.
So, but there are no rules. The only rule that we have in the entire queendom is whatever I say, whenever I say it, as fast as you can, with a big grin on your face. Other than that, don't care what you do.
Now, you have made one of the biggest events in Jackson, and that's the St. Patrick's Day Parade. And in typical Jill fashion, it's about a week after St. Patrick's Day.
Yes.
Yes,
mhm.
they
2 weeks after. Yeah, it's on the 25th because spring break comes the third weekend, so you can't get marching bands in the third week. And so, it's just an excuse to drink and drive. So what doesn't do it?
But they're all in regalia, right?
They fly in, drive in, everywhere in full regalia, and the whole way. I mean, they just from start to finish. Now they come. The parade's on Saturday, the 25th. They come in on Wednesday, and stay until Tuesday. And I don't drink, so it's a long weekend for me. So they're all, well, I have to be nice for all those days.
Is being nice hard?
It's a challenge.
It really is. Hey, Roy, I want to talk about what Southern humor is and why it's, the old adage, that the South has the nation's best writers and worst readers. And so if Roy, you
You
spend
can
half
write about your neighbors and they won't know.
you spend half your year here in New Orleans. You wrote that great book, Feet on the Street, about New Orleans, but the other half of the year in Western Massachusetts, which I'm real familiar with, they are very different.
Yeah, they once had there was a story in the paper about a differently abled dog race. And it turned, I don't think a three-legged dog minds being called a three-legged dog.
They know.
Or is interested in racing, really.
Right? Yeah, that's right.
But, so there's that. I mean, they use different terms up there, but they're nice people, and they remind me of, I grew up in North Georgia, which is, we don't have February in North Georgia like they do in Massachusetts. It's a terrible time to be in Massachusetts. But it's a nice, I like, we live on a little river. Up there we live on a little river, and down here we live on a big river. And it's a nice contrast. That's the only difference, really. The river's bigger down here.
Food's better.
Yeah, the food is better.
Mike, if we talk about Southern writers, and they really do love to grab a hold of the fact that, down here there's so many characters, that the eccentricity. Do you think that's a pro and a con in here?
Yeah. Well, in my novel, I try to capture the richness of both. I have, people, yachts that are, that we all know and are related to. And then and I have other people that are more sophisticated and just, so you try to do both. But I think, being Southern, there's a lot of different facets of it. My wife is from up north, God forgive her. And she, no, but she, she's still not used. You don't realize it when you grow up in a place that it's unique, and she's still getting used to it. The other day, a roach came running across the floor, and she screams. She's just freaking out, and I kill the thing, and she's like, well, how do you think it got in here? I'm like, honey, this is New Orleans. It was born in here.
Wondering how you got in there.
Yeah, it went to Jesuit. I mean, what do you want? So yeah, it's a little different down here.
I think of that because it's created in books and everything. Created such an image for the South, and some of it, like I was talking to a guy that's trying to bring companies into New Orleans, and with all of that in the movies and the books and such, we seem like we're kind of out there, And he said to me, he's trying to bring companies in here, and he said, New Orleans is the kind of girl you want to date but not marry. And so I thought, wow, all right, I guess that's moving businesses in town. I don't really know. But you're, Roy, I would say that, this is true for Jill too, not only the subject, but that voice. I mean, you have a certain Southern voice when you write.
Somebody asked me what I was astounded once early on in my appearing in bookstores career. Somebody in the question said, "How did you get your voice?" and I hadn't thought about it really, but I finally thought about it. And as a writer, I got my voice by trying to write like other people and failing. And the part that didn't work, I just kept.
Jill, you mentioned that before you wrote your first book, you had a pretty difficult time in your life. I think your dad died and you'd gone through a divorce. Was writing kind of therapy for you?
Well, it's, I've always written. Just from everything that I do in life actually is for my entertainment. And so as it's turned out, it entertains other people as well. And so I have been, as we say down here, richly blessed and highly favored.
Bless your heart. Now, Jill, I've read some things about you, and you have an interesting take on this next subject, and I don't think you're telling the truth, but that's okay. I teach in the business school across the street, and you have created one of the greatest brands out there, and yet I've heard you say that wasn't your goal, or no. How can that be?
Well,
People are trying to kill themselves over there trying to get this kind of brand.
It just happened, and you mentioned about how difficult it is to get a book published. When people ask me, what do I do? I said, well, I can really only speak from my own personal experience, and that is go home and wait for them to call and ask for it. That is what I do. I still have no idea to this day how you get a book published. They called and asked me for it, and I said, okay.
Now, Mike, you used that same technique, but then it was a long time before they called. That was
It was a long time, but I did stumble on this technique. I happened to have two publishers at once interested after like 50 years, and the one publisher was smaller than the other one, and so my wife said, call the bigger publisher and tell them you got another offer. I'm like, they're not gonna. That doesn't mean anything. They probably forgot about my book. It's been months. But I called them, and they called back like 2 days later, and they're like, all right, you put a gun to our head, we'll publish it. I'm like, I should have been doing this the whole time.
Yeah.
I got someone else on the line or whatever.
Well, it's what they say, if you're already got a date to the prom, it's pretty easy. Everybody else wants to take you. So I guess that's... Roy, when you started, though, all these people look up to you, Roy, but when you started, they...
Boy, I'm glad I came in here.
I
was standing in the men's room 5 minutes. didn't hear any kind of
No, there was
compliments
a.
at all. I'm gonna go out and come back in again. Jesus, what? I'm sorry.
And you got pie, man.
Yeah, no, it's.
Yeah.
And of course, we get paid by the head, so this is terrific.
Wow.
And,
Yeah, thank you.
we're not paid, right?
No,
I
We know
don't-
it.
I
Just
don't
I
think so.
want to clear that up. I just, but Roy, did you have writers that you mentioned they had different voices, but was there a couple of people out there that you wanted to be like?
Still are. I had a high school English teacher in the 10th grade who was the one who had never occurred to me that I would be a writer, actually, but I would write stuff, and for class. And she said she gave me a lot of writers like Robert Benchley and James Thurber and S.J. Perlman and E.B. White, and suggested, and also she suggested that I write for the school paper. And I wrote for the school paper and made fun of everybody in the class and became popular off of it. I had not been popular before, and I thought that was a pretty good gig. And so, and I loved all those writers. They were New Yorker writers, which are different from. And I had always read Mark Twain. I love Mark Twain. And but Charles Portis is my favorite. Is my favorite funny writer. He died not too long ago. And the American Library of America just put out the entire writings of Charles Portis. I really recommend that a lot.
Yeah, that was highlighted in Oxford American. They talked about that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
he's
That's
great.
great.
He's really funny because he was so. I mean, all of the characters in his books are dead serious. Nobody's ever trying to make anybody laugh in his books, which is. If there's one thing I recommend as a funny writer, to future funny writers, is don't make the characters funny. Just make them not aware of how funny they are, and then you can kind of enjoy it more because I don't know. Now I'm getting off into theory, which is a good thing. I'll tell you the quintessential Southern joke, which is about the man that was, now I've forgotten what it is. The quintessential Southern joke was, he was asked if he believed in infant baptism. And he said, "Believe in it, I've seen it done." It's an intersection of faith-based and reality-based. You can kind of go with that a long way.
Jill, you've had the opposite of that in one respect is your characters are pretty funny.
I tell everything I know about everybody I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jim
the
Soames is
Alfredo,
sitting
first
here
of
real
all.
nervous right now. No, Dan Jenkins was my favorite author.
Really?
Still is. The only person I have ever fangirled over in my life. I was speaking at a thing. There were 3 presidents of the United States at this event where I was speaking. It was, it was good. Nice to meet him. And then I heard this voice behind me. Somebody said something about Dan Jenkins, and I literally almost turned the table over on a bunch of people and just ran screaming across the room and threw myself on him. He was confused, but happy.
Yeah, I was friends with Dan Jenkins for a long time, and he told a story about how when he was a kid, teenager, he and his friends would have not nom de plume, but aliases that they would use if they ever got picked up by the police, and his was going to be John Jones, which is a wonderful choice. But sure enough, he did get picked up for some kind of mischief by the police, and they said, "Boy, what's your name?" And he said, "John Jones." And he said, "What?" And he said, "Dan Jenkins."
The Queens, though, they are real people.
Yes, all the queens are real people, and we all go by the prefix name of Tammy because Tammy is kind of the quintessential Southern name, and we all wanted it as our stage name, and so we all have it.
Now, you're originally from, you were born in Tupelo.
Born in Tupelo.
And most people think you're bigger than Elvis.
Well, I'm larger than Elvis.
Not Wait. Elvis.
Well,
He
no,
was quite large.
it's diminished
It is. Mike, first of all, you've written
Call
a
me
number-
Tammy, please.
Tammy Mike.
Timer.
Tammy, Mike.
You need a middle name, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole key. And if you want to be a blues singer, you have to come up with, let's see, it's an infirmity, and then,
Well, he would be blind, Tammy Mike.
yeah. And a vegetable, I think, I'm gonna go as, let's see, colorblind Satsuma, I think is what I'm gonna try something regional. You've written, not, Mike and I laugh about this all the time, he's written a number of books, but many are very thin. Yeah. I want to tell these.
I can tell this is going to be an intellectual conversation. Talk about Peter measures books by their depth.
Yes,
how
right.
thick they
Not
are.
depth in terms of,
Yeah,
right.
no, not in
No.
reading. Yeah,
Yes.
and page numbers.
But
yeah.
your new one is of average size.
I think it is an average size book. Would you write me a review on
I
that?
would love to do that.
Average
That's
size
that'll be
book.
great. Yeah.
Must read quickly.
Holds back most of our doors. Right. There's yeah.
Back
No,
Earth.
Roy, when you first of all, you were not born in the South, but all your formative years were
Both my parents were from the Deep South, and they went up north just long enough to screw up my narrative, and then moved down to Decatur, Georgia when I was 18 months old. So
Well, you've overcome.
I'm entitled.
You've overcome your handicap.
I'm entitled to be Southern.
It's
Lots
worked.
of people say, "What does he know? He's born in Indianapolis." But that was 18 months of my life, and I didn't
And the
even.
worst, worst 18
Oh yeah, I cried the whole time.
Didn't sleep well either.
Soiled yourself.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. The
And that was last night, So
yeah, laying on the floor. It sounds
Yeah, I couldn't even get up and walk around.
sounds like a fraternity boy. It's as if there's going to be fraternity boys in here. There's not going to be
Yeah.
any problem.
yeah, it's a big frat crowd here. I can tell.
I see some former ones.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Still hanging on, boys. Good job.
Yeah, Jill, we think of the books as very, very funny and all these interesting characters, but underneath all that, aren't they really women empowerment books?
I think so, and I think that humor is the most important factor in life. I mean, especially the world as it is today. If you can't laugh at it, you're going to die, and you're going to die miserable. But I make fun of everything in my books, starting with myself, and it's most of the time in life. I say all the time, if whatever problem you have, denial would be the main symptom for a long time, and I believe that if I can make you laugh at it, then on some level you've had to acknowledge the existence of it, which does open the door for dealing with it. Now, I did not have that in mind when I started. I was just, telling everything I know about everybody I know and entertaining myself at their expense. But as it happens, it has a positive spin.
We're going to open it up for questions, and I think there's a mic in the center here that.
I know everything except algebra. Roy will field all math questions.
It comes up a lot. Let's see. Nobody yet? Oh, it's like a shy group.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She's not shy.
There's a lady.
There we go. Yeah,
There
yeah.
we go.
I have a 3-year-old child. I base most of my child raising off of your advice.
How's that going? How's that?
Simple advice for dealing with small children.
Hold the baby every second that you can, because it is over that fast. Mine is 35 years old and will no longer let me hold her. But I was approached by 2 women psychologists who were very famous and had a radio show and all that after the Raising Children for Fun and Profit book came out, and because I talk in there about never letting them cry to sleep, however that became popular, I don't know, and so I spoke vehemently about it, against it in the book, and they called and said, how did you know this? She said, I woke up human one day. I don't know. That's all the baby's got is screaming. You pick them up. That's your job. And so, there's the humor does convey the greater message. So good. Sure.
Could you talk about what, as my youth, Sports Illustrated was like the greatest magazine.
Sure
I couldn't
was.
wait to get it every week. Could you talk about that time? And I mean, it's sort of, maybe, you know, the world's changed now, and it's not there like it used to be. Could you talk about Sports Illustrated and what it was like to be there?
Well, it was a great job. I didn't realize at the time. I mean, you could come into the office if you wanted to, and if you did come in the office, there would be somebody running down the hall chasing somebody else, and there would be people smoking weed in the stair.
That's a plus.
Stair. What do you call? You know, you would open up and go into the stair place. And there would be, we didn't call it weed though at the time. I'm just saying that because I'm trying to be young. But the whole point was, you know, anybody could write a good story sober. So you tried to, you know, see how you could write, how good a story you could write. And it turned out you could write better drunk sometimes. There was lots of staying up and having a good time and hanging out with crazy athletes. And I spent a whole season with the Pittsburgh Steelers and got to know a lot of guys. And it was a time when you could get to know athletes, and because they weren't making much more money than you were, and they all didn't have managers and everything in between them and the media. And TV was not so big. So now you just have to say something, anything in your own TV, and so they don't tend to want to talk about their childhood. Whereas in the old days they did. And you go talk to their high school coach and stuff, and you could just get all kind of great stuff about America out of writing about athletes. So I look back, but the whole time I was trying to figure out how to leave, you know, and go somewhere where I was, you know, could write about other things than sports. But you could, at Sports Illustrated, you could write about the world's oldest living lifeguard and things like that. And now he would have to be famous before you can write about it.
Well, as an American boy, and you're probably the same way, that back part where they had was it in the crowd?
Yeah, oh, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Little in the, yeah.
I always wanted to be in that. It was
Oh, yeah.
Towards the front, yeah, right.
Yeah.
You know, local athletes and they're
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Some kid
It's a
through.
magical magazine.
I always wanted to be in a swimsuit issue. But
Yeah, there's
you think a book's hard to publish? Wow. Yeah.
Got a question.
I recently relocated from the South to the Midwest. That's why I'm the only one following the rules and being into this microphone.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you.
Next.
Well, I was going to call attention to Roy Blount's incredibly prolific and introduction to Substack, and that you are writing possibly more words now than back in the Sports
For less
Illustrated
money,
days.
yeah.
And I recommend it highly, and I wanted to ask about the positive or negative effects of deadlines on both creativity and humor.
Deadlines. I always liked deadlines because you knew you had to do it, you know. That's another thing about, you know, proving you could write at the last minute too, you know. And it was kind of athletic writing for back then. You know, you stay up all night and then say, "Oh shit, I got to write a story." And, and
I was
write-
interviewed once by a writer's magazine. They said it's very difficult to write humor. What advice would you offer to anybody who's struggling to write humor? And I said, if you are struggling to write humor, you are not funny. It's right. You should write. You're a very nice person. You should write something else. But I did want to say one thing to anybody out there who is struggling to write anything, is that one thing I have discovered is that no matter who you are, no matter what you have written, somebody somewhere hates it. And Willie Morris, you know, hated reading reviews because inevitably there would be a bad one and it would upset him. He would take it personally. And so Joanne would keep them from him. But he found one once, and it would just say it was John Smith had written a particularly scathing review about Willie's latest book. And Willie sat down and wrote him and said, you know, "Dear Mr. Smith, I have read with great interest your latest review of my latest book." And he said, "I don't pretend to know what people will be reading 500 years from now, but I'm completely confident that it will not be the collected criticisms of John Smith.
Whoa.
And on the flip side, there's someone somewhere that will love your work. So
Yes.
just never give up.
Pay attention to them.
You'd be a rough coach.
I interrupted Michael Distrand when he was trying to give me a plug, and that's what's wrong with my career, my whole life. I have there's a thing called Substack.com, where you can go on there and find my Substack. You can get it for free for a little while, and then you have to pay. So and I write a couple of things a week. I enjoy it, and it's a floating deadline. Whenever you feel like you have got to write something.
Like an Uber driver or something.
Yeah, that's
sort of
right.
like an
Take
Uber
another
driver,
piece of
yeah.
my heart.
Yeah, Take Another Piece of My Heart is the name of my Substack. Oh, cool.
Another question.
I wondered if Roy was Bud Shrake a contemporary of yours? I'm reading an anthology of his work, and I find it really funny. I wondered if maybe you could comment on him because I wasn't really familiar with him. But did you know him at Sports
Yes,
Illustrated?
Edwin Bud Shrake was a great friend of mine, and of Dan. He and Dan Jenkins grew up together in Fort Worth, Texas, and they worked for newspapers, and then they worked for Sports Illustrated, and they were a great pair. And Bud was he later became, oh my God, I can't think of the name of the governor of Texas. Ann Richards.
Yeah, there you go.
He and Ann Richards were an item for the last several years of her life, or his life. And he was really funny. He and Jenkins were really funny. And I'm trying, well, I can just remember little things. He, I can't remember. Anyway, I remember taking a new writer at Sports Illustrated and somebody to meet Bud, take her around to meet everybody in the halls, and she said, and I said, "This is Bud Shrake," and she said, "Hello," and he said, "I'm just going around the corner for some turpentine. What, you want any?" And she didn't know what to say. But they were. What was I going to? I have a Bud Shrake anecdote. If you'll send me a self-addressed envelope, I'll remember my Bud Shrake. He was a real big, tall guy, and everybody I've ever known named Bud was I liked. Have you ever met a Bud you didn't like?
Budweiser?
Yeah.
He was friends with Larry.
I wrote a song once called that I can't remember, called "I'm a Sadder Budweiser Man."
Was it a limerick?
Yeah. She made.
Have you got a limerick at hand?
Yeah, I've got a lyric.
Was that?
I have a one called, a Cajun Lady's Lament. It goes like this, if I can remember it. Our wedding again is postponed. He says he will, then he won't. I'm and prime and time all rhyme. But Boudreaux, now I can't think of the word. Well, you can imagine the last line. All rhyme, but
Something don't.
yeah. Joan, you don't remember? My wife doesn't even remember. I'll think of it. Remember the first four lines, and I'll come. But
Glad it's not a sonnet. You never.
Yes, Roy, you mentioned Ann Richards, the former governor of Texas. I remember she told a story where it was their legislature was in session, and they only come once every 2 years, which is much smarter than Louisiana of every year. But she brought a friend up, and that person watched the legislature in action, and she came back to Ann at the end of the day, and she said, "God, that legislature is made up of a lot of morons." And Ann said, "Well, if it weren't, it would not be a representative government." Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Mike.
Thank y'all.